There we go. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Welcome to today's AMA with Collette King and Dennis. Collette is the product manager of the newest HubSpot feature called Sandboxes. It was announced last week at Inbound. And before we jump into the introductions, I'd love to do some housekeeping first. This isn't Ask Me Anything, so feel free to ask Colette any questions you have about HubSpot, how to become a better admin, a developer. This time is here to dedicated to you to becoming a better professional using HubSpot. And you can also ask the questions in any way you like, whether that's through the chat or just by unmuting yourself, maybe showing your video and talking to us directly. There are really no wrong questions here or a wrong way to participate. So yeah. Let's jump right in. I'm Jan. If you don't know me, I'm the HubSpot community manager for our RevOps and operations community, and I'm joined today by Dennis, who is from the developer community. How are you doing, Dennis?
I am doing very well. Thanks for having me here, Jan.
Yeah, no problem. Love to have you. And our guest of honor is, of course, Collette. Great to have you here as well. How are you doing?
Hi, great. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Okay, let's kick it off. I have a few questions of my own before we head right in and hear from all of you here. Let's hear a bit from you. Like, who are you? I want to hear a bit more about the person behind this brand new feature.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Collette King. I'm a senior product manager here at HubSpot. I have been at HubSpot for just over 2 years, probably about 2.5 years now, and I've worked on a number of different teams. So I started on our marketplace team. So if you're familiar with our app marketplace or our solutions directory, those are all experiences that I've worked on. I also worked on our strategic integrations team, which is when HubSpot builds certain integrations with other providers, other software apps to help you guys bring more of your data into HubSpot or get your data in HubSpot into the other systems that you use. And I am also working on a couple of other data migration projects that we have on HubSpot that are a little bit more backend heavy. And now I'm also working on Sandboxes. So I started working on Sandboxes in January of this year. I joined a team that was formed sort of towards the end of last year, and it's been really, really fun. The team has been cranking all year long to get everything ready for Inbound. And there's a lot of other stuff that we're excited to deliver. I'm based in Boston, and I really enjoy trying new restaurants with my roommates or cooking dinner with them on the weekends.
That's awesome. It's great to see that everything was ready in time for Inbound. I know that's always like very difficult. Yeah, but that was amazing. I'd love for you to kind of show what Sandboxes is all about, like how to set it up and what it looks and feels like.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just shout if anything looks funky, but so yes, I'm going to go ahead and demo Sandboxes. I am super excited to show off this product. So just a little bit of housekeeping about Sandboxes themselves. Today, Sandboxes is an enterprise only feature. So if you have any enterprise hub with HubSpot, you will have access to Sandboxes, and Sandboxes will work for all of the products that you have, not just the enterprise products. So let's say you've got Sales Hub Enterprise and Marketing Pro, Sandboxes will support both of those. It's just that you have to have one enterprise portal in order to have access to them. So to find Sandboxes, you want to go up here to the gear on the upper right-hand side, and then you're going to scroll under Account Setup. On the left-hand side, you'll click on Sandboxes, and this is going to be the page that you see when you arrive here. So we've got this nice little survey if you'd like to leave us more feedback, although I'm happy to take all of your feedback here today. You can check out our knowledge base article, which just describes a little bit about what syncs to Sandboxes, some of the limitations and how those things work. So if you ever forget or have a question, the knowledge base article is definitely your best first point of contact. So I'm going to go ahead and create a sandbox. So when you create a sandbox, you can customize it and give it a name. Right now, customers only have access to one sandbox out of the gate. So making sure that you're not duplicating names is not as important. So you can just leave it as sandbox 1, or you could say developers only sandbox, or maybe if you just want your admin team to use it, you can use that as well. Super admins are the only people in a portal who can actually see the Sandbox's homepage. So this page right here is only visible to super admins because they will be the only people who have access to the Sandbox sort of immediately out of the gate. So looking at some of the things that sync to a Sandbox, these first two up here are not sort of user settable is what we call them internally. They are the crux of the Sandbox. So the first line item here, account tools and features, Sandboxes mirror everything that is in your production account in terms of features and functionality. So like I said, if you have Sales Hub Enterprise, that's what your Sandbox is going to have. If you have a 5,000 asset limit in something, that's what your Sandbox is going to have. So we really do mirrors the features and functionality and all the limits of your production account. The one exception to that is transactional email. If you have the transactional email add-on, we don't sync over transactional email in Sandboxes right now. But it is something that we are super close to being able to add and announce. So hopefully you see that before the end of the year. I'm very excited to get that rolled out. And then the other piece that users don't necessarily have control over is super admins. At HubSpot, we won't let you create a portal without having someone in there to own it and be responsible for it. So we sync over all of the super admins from your production account into your Sandbox account. These super admins will be able to see the Sandbox account from this page that we were just on. They'll also be able to see it in their portal picker, which if you're a user in multiple portals, you're probably familiar with. It's just a drop down when you log into HubSpot that lets you kind of see all of the portals that you as a user have access to. Other users who are not super admins can be added to a Sandbox portal the exact same way that any user would be added to HubSpot. You just go in, you set up all their permissions, and then send that invite email to the Sandbox account. So then getting into some of the things that users have control over, we sync over object definitions. So these are things like your property groups, your custom properties, custom object definitions, all of those things that sort of build your CRM schema that you've defined in your production account will get synced over to your Sandbox account. We'll also sync over deal and ticket pipelines, as well as any pipelines that you have for your custom objects. And you'll notice that object definitions is grayed out. So it's not something that I can deselect right now. And the reason for that is because pipelines depends on object definitions. You can't sync over your pipelines if you don't have the definitions for all of your objects in the portal. So if I for some reason didn't want object definitions, I'd have to deselect pipelines and then unselect object definitions. And what this would do would basically create an account that's just an account that has all of the features and functionality of production, but none of your customizations or personalizations for your company. And then the last thing that we support syncing for today is CMS themes, templates, and modules, which is really awesome. These can sometimes be a little bit bulky and take a little bit to sync. So that is why they are off by default. But if you want them in your Sandbox account, all you have to do is check the box and they will sync over the same way that everything else up here syncs over. It looks like we've got a question in the chat. I want to make sure I address it before moving on.
No, it's just me stating that you're an awesome person.
Oh, okay.
Agreeing.
Great. All right, I'm going to go ahead and create my Sandbox. All right, so one thing that you're going to notice here is that it says that 10 changes synced. So if I click over here to my activity log, I can see that the last date that the Sandbox was synced to, what Sandbox it was synced to. So the name, how many changes synced, and then I can click on here and I can actually view the details of what's synced. So this is a brand new portal that I created this morning to make everything clean for the demo. So there's not a lot here right now, but you'll see a list of all of the things that the Sandbox attempted to sync. If there was an error in syncing to the Sandbox, a big yellow box would appear right above here, and there would be a blue button that says view details. If you click on that, it's going to take you to the same panel that I just showed you, but it's going to have a list of everything that succeeded and everything that failed. All right, I'm going to go into the Sandbox account, and you're going to see that the Sandbox account looks very similar to a HubSpot account because it is a normal HubSpot account. You have a separate portal ID for this Sandbox, exactly the same way that you have a portal ID for your regular HubSpot account. You have the same banner. And if you go over here to your properties and pipelines, you'll see that I have the exact same number of properties in my Sandbox account as I do in my production account. one of the ways that we sort of distinguish between production and Sandbox is this giant yellow bar at the top. This will follow you around the app as you are checking out Sandboxes. And if you need to get back to your production account at any time, you can just click this link and it'll take you back to the Sandboxes homepage. So like I said, the only people that will get brought over are super admins. If there are any other users in the portal, you're going to have to add them manually to the Sandbox. Just because you add someone to a Sandbox does not mean that they have access to your production account. So let's say you're working with an agency partner or a team of contractors, you can add them to your Sandbox account and trust that they only have access to that account. If they click this return to production button, they're going to see an error and they're not going to be able to have access to your production data. So they'll only see what is available in the Sandbox account.
Hey, Collette, can I ask a question about users in that sense?
Sure.
For those that we manually add, do they in the Sandbox get super admin access to mess with stuff, or does their access permission copy over as well?
So anyone that you add, you'll have to reconfigure their roles and permissions specifically for the Sandbox account.
Got it. So we can grant them additional access in the Sandbox so they can mess with stuff on their own.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other two things that I want to point out about Sandbox accounts is that right now, both email functionality and calling functionality are turned off. So if you're checking out Sandboxes, you might see a big red banner on some of the email and calling tools that says that this portal sort of has been marked as low trust. That is to help protect Sandboxes, and we're actually going to be rolling that protection back in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be switching to a model where users will be able to send emails from Sandboxes, but only to email addresses that are connected to users on the portal. So if I wanted to send an email to someone from the Sandbox account, I would only be able to send emails to coking@hubspot.com. And the main reason that we've done this is that we want users to feel really safe putting in customer data, testing it out with the actual lists and contacts that you'll be using in your production account if you're looking at workflows or an integration and trying to figure out how data syncs over. We don't want you to have to come up with a lot of test data, but we also don't want you to accidentally email someone and cause a really bad experience for customers. So that is the current workaround for email that should be getting rolled out in the next couple of weeks. Calling will remain turned off in Sandboxes for the foreseeable future. And I think that's most of it.
All right. Yeah, that's thanks for sharing that. I think I really like the fact that you just can't email any like personal data or like any actual contacts. I think that was definitely one of the questions that I had. I wanted to ask you, like, what was the strategy there? But it's really great to see that was covered, and it's not possible.
Sorry, one more thing about personal data. GDPR deletes will waterfall into your Sandbox account. So if you do put a contact information into your Sandbox account and that contact requests they sort of express their right to be forgotten and they get deleted from their production account, that will cascade into the Sandbox. We will remove that person. So the GDPR protections transfer over as well. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but I didn't want to leave that one out.
No, thanks for adding that. Yeah, I think I just wanted to ask one more question. But before I do, anyone, if you have any questions, be sure to put them in the chat where we can answer them, or just unmute and interrupt us. We'd be happy to help you there. But one more question that I had for Collette was, and this is something that I'm always interested in hearing about, is what kind of obstacles did you face along the way of developing this feature, and did you have to work around, or what kind of problems that you have to solve to get this launching at Inbound?
Yeah. So I think that the big boulder for Sandboxes that we struggled with this year, and we honestly will probably continue to struggle with moving forward, is that if you've been a HubSpot customer for a while, you've probably noticed that our product has grown. HubSpot accounts can be massive. There is a ton of data and information that can be stored in HubSpot accounts. And copying all of that over, there was a couple of ways that we could have gone about building a Sandbox. And one is we just throw everything on the wall and we try to sync every single piece of data inside of HubSpot over into a Sandbox as quickly as humanly possible. And that was one strategy that we sort of opted not to take. And then the other strategy is to be a little bit more intentional about what syncs over to a Sandbox. And we decided to go that route for a couple of reasons. One is it is a technically less overwhelming project rather than having to work with everything inside of HubSpot. The way that sandboxes sort of work is that we have to change how the data and information and customizations are stored inside of HubSpot so that the sandbox can kind of recognize and mirror them appropriately. And doing that across the entire HubSpot product would have been very difficult and time consuming for a lot of teams. So we wanted to sort of focus in on what we thought was going to be the most important piece of information. The other reason for that is that in talking with a lot of customers, we heard over and over again, I'd like to see a full mirror of my production account because I need to test everything. And when you sort of start to push on that a little bit and you try to ask, like, how are people going to test, how are you going to test this, or what's the plan? People get a little bit stuck and they start to feel a little bit overwhelmed about potentially testing changes across 10,000 contacts or 15,000 contacts. Like, how are you actually going to know if your potential workflow impacted all of those contacts the way that you wanted them to? So what we're trying to do with Sandboxes is make sure that we're only bringing over the information that customers actually need for testing. And this is going to continue to expand over time. But we might also just change our tactic and bring over some data and additionally give more tools that help provide visibility into the changes that someone's making in their Sandbox account so that it's easier to run those experiments, feel really confident in the changes that you're making without having to manually spot check 10,000 contacts. So I think that push and pull will be really difficult.
We have a couple questions in the chat that I think are pretty good so far. SSO, is it supported?
Yes, SSO is supported in Sandboxes.
And one that I'm particularly excited about that Chris just asked is the CLI. How does one work with should this be like your development environment and then you can push to production via the CLI?
Yes. So Sandboxes work the exact same way that any other HubSpot account does. You just need to run HS auth and then you are off to the races. So Sandboxes should work as a wonderful test environment. One thing I am very excited about that a lot of the developers in beta got excited about was for things like pipelines or stages, IDs stay the same. So if that is important to you, it is actually a very big upgrade from our previous developer test accounts where we were recreating everything and all the IDs were changing all of the time. So that was a big win.
That's huge.
Yeah, that was actually also, sorry, Dennis, you go ahead.
No, so it's okay. As I'm saying, like, there are a few things. I've been working at HubSpot for about 1.5 years now, and there are things that make me annoyed that I'm not working at an agency anymore. And Sandboxes is one of them because it's like one of those features I want to use all the time. I wish I had when I was at the agency. So I'm not quitting HubSpot anytime soon, but this is an amazing feature.
All right, so I think let's just officially hand it over to the audience. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute or put them in the chat. Yeah, we'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, so I have a question. Basically what you're saying is in the production environment, everything, like a new property you set up automatically syncs to the Sandbox account. Is that correct?
So new properties will sync sort of when they're triggered. We're not running all these syncs in the background. If you added a new property in your production environment and you wanted that to get transferred over your Sandboxes, you'd come over to this little button here. You're going to press sync to Sandbox and it's going to run another sync. And one thing to call out is that when you sync things from production to Sandboxes, if you've made a change, let's say you have a deal pipeline and you're testing out a couple new stages in your Sandbox account, so you've been messing around with that. When you run this sync again, that will overwrite the changes that you've made to that deal pipeline, and it will reset it to mirror production. So every time you sync to your Sandbox account, it will reset everything in the Sandbox account to mirror production. So it could potentially overwrite changes. So that's just one thing that I want to call out. But yes, you can update things just by pressing start sync. You can also delete your Sandbox and start again with a fresh one as many times as you'd like. There are no limits on that.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Collette, may I ask another question?
Sure.
I guess that's what we're here for. So that when you do that sync, I think it's pretty obvious in there, but just confirming that, let's say I have a super admin that I've removed from my production account. Would that person also be removed from the sandbox?
Yes, and that action, you actually don't need to wait for them to, we will handle that on the background. You can just, if you want to trigger that sync to be extra sure, we will definitely remove the super admin when you sync the sandbox, but that's actually something that we handle on the back end as part of product protection.
All right, and I think we have a couple questions more by Chris in the chat here. Is there documentation using CLI with HS auth for this sandbox account?
I don't know if there's anything specific to sandboxes. I'm going to guess that there isn't, but if you follow the documentation just for using the CLI for HubSpot in general, it will apply to sandbox accounts.
And I think he asked another question: is Sandbox dynamically updated from prod, or is just a Snapchat at the time of creation? A snapshot, I think
It's
he.
a snapshot,
yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Another thing that I want to mention is sandboxes can be ungated for betas. Like these are true normal HubSpot accounts. So if we won't automatically sync your betas over. But if you would like to try something out and you just want to try it out in your sandbox account, you can ask your CSM or whichever HubSpotter you're sort of talking to get access to that beta. You can give them the portal ID for your sandbox account, test it out there rather than having that applied before it applies maybe to your production account. The one thing I'd call out there is, again, because we are not syncing over the betas on our end and you have to sort of get added by HubSpot. If you delete your sandbox, you're going to get a new, and you create another one, you're going to get a new portal ID and you're going to have to ask for access again to that beta.
On my sync, will the my integrations sync over? Do I need to set those up again?
Nope, you'll have to set those integrations up again.
And I can ask questions all day. I love asking questions. So the sandbox is getting bigger and bigger. You have this internal sandbox, you have the CMS sandbox account, and you have the developer app test accounts, which are also like a sandbox in a sense. When would you use any of these? How do you differentiate? What's your priority on them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in general, I'm also a little bit biased here, so take this with a grain of salt. But in general, if you have access to a sandbox account that is sort of the one that we're talking about today, this is probably the one that you're going to want to use. And the reason for that is it's connected to your HubSpot production account. So that just makes setting it up a lot easier than setting up either a CMS sandbox account or developer test account. Both of those accounts are sort of removed from your customer account that you're paying for. So it doesn't know about all of the work that you've put into it. So in general, we would recommend using the sandbox account that's connected to your customer account for most cases. I think when we see people sort of starting to still use developer test accounts or still using CMS sandbox accounts is one, if they've already invested a lot in either of these test environments. So if you've taken a lot of time to set those up, and that's working for you, please continue to use that. We are still going to support those accounts. They're not going away anytime soon. And then the other time that we've seen people using them is when they have multiple teams inside of HubSpot. Because you only have access to one sandbox right now, if you have, let's say your ops team is looking to sort of change the data model or looking to experiment with workflows or maybe something else, and you have a development team that's working on a custom integration, you might want to keep those in separate environments. That's really a company to company decision, and it depends on how closely those teams are working together or how separate they are. But sometimes people will opt to send one team to a developer test account. It's usually tends to be the developer team that goes to developer test accounts or CMS sandboxes because they tend to be a little bit more familiar with that. But that's a company by company decision.
All right, I think Chris asked another question here. Will even add advanced menus copy over during the creation of the sandbox?
So unfortunately, not right now. It's just the themes, templates, and modules, but not the specific pages or implementations of those. And so we also don't sync menus. That is a feature that we've been asked for, and I would love to add it in 2022 at some point. I'm not making a guarantee that that's going to happen, but it is something that we're thinking about.
All right, and I think there was another question here. In the knowledge base, it says workflows in prod won't copy over to Sandboxes.
Yes, so we don't sync workflows right now. It is something that we know a lot of people are really interested in, and we're actively working on it. I expect that to be in some form of a beta also before the end of the year. So please stay tuned for that. Keep an eye on our product updates page, or check in with your CSM or your agency partner. They will know about this when we go into public beta with it. But it's something we're actively working on. Workflows are definitely a big ask. But workflows work in the Sandbox account. So if you're trying to test out an idea with a workflow, feel free to go in and set that up just as you would in your production account.
Right, thanks. Yeah, let's wait until maybe some more questions come in. Feel free to unmute or put them in the chat if you have any.
I think sort of the other feature that I feel pretty confident teasing or starting to talk about is push to production. So right now, Sandboxes is a one-way sync from your production account to your Sandbox account, but the team is actively working on making that sync go the other way. I think that probably to start, it will be syncing net new things. So something that you've created in your Sandbox will sync back to production, and then we'll kind of continue to grow from there. But right now, Sandboxes is a one-way sync. So any changes that you make, you're going to have to manually recreate in your production account. But push to prod is coming very soon.
With that push to prod, can you be selective about what you sync back up? Or I know
Yes.
it's not there yet, but okay, cool.
Yeah, so you'll be able to select sort of individual. Today, when you sync to a Sandbox, you're sort of selecting by asset type. So all object definitions, all pipelines, all of whatever type it is. But when we go back from Sandboxes to production, it's going to be a lot more granular. You'll be able to pick things by name.
I also just want to confirm, sorry, me talking. Hi, Dennis. I got a question. This also includes like all standard objects plus custom objects, correct?
Yep. So we bring over object definitions. So we're not copying over all of your contacts, companies, deals, and tickets, but we won't copy over the individual objects themselves, but we do bring over the custom object definition.
Cool.
I think there was one question in the community that was asked before the event went live. That was about the number of sandboxes that you can have. I mean, you previously talked about having the normal sandbox next to the developer sandbox, and you can combine those, but you can only have one actual sandbox, right?
Yes, right now you can only have one sandbox at a time. We've heard requests for different numbers of sandboxes, and that's something that we're continuing to look at.
Okay.
Can you give us any details on the forward-looking aspect? What's the roadmap looking like?
I was just about to ask the same.
The question that everyone and my manager would love to know. So I think some of the things that I've talked about a little bit, we are actively working on syncing workflows to Sandboxes. We're also actively working on getting push back to production rolled out. There are a couple of interim steps that we need for both of those things. Those are really big focuses this year. That does not mean that they are actually getting delivered to all of you this year, although that would be wonderful if they did, but we're actively working on both of those things. And then I think in 2022, our general plan is to continue to think about sort of that experience of multiple teams working inside of HubSpot. So we know that ops teams want to use Sandboxes, but also development teams need to use Sandboxes, and maybe marketing needs their own Sandbox account. So sort of thinking about how all of those things will work together in conjunction with features and functionality like push to production. How does push to production happen when there are 3, 4, 2, however many sandboxes? So potentially thinking a lot about that experience and continuing to work with other teams inside of HubSpot to get more stuff syncing into sandboxes. So we talked a little bit about menus earlier. Would love to see menus and pages starting to sync over to sandboxes so someone can really test out changes to their website or any of their big CMS experiences that they have. We've gotten a lot of questions about integrations. Are there things that we can do to make integration syncing back and forth a little bit easier? You'll probably always have to sort of off the integration inside of the Sandbox account. That's not something that we'll want to sync between accounts because it's just a little bit risky, but syncing over integration settings and not making you set those things up, that is about 2 times, that's totally on the table. So those are probably the big focuses. This year it's push to prod and workflows. And next year it will really be thinking about sort of the comprehensive experience and then continuing to add more asset syncing.
Do you consider version control? Like, let's say I push to prod and something goes horrendously wrong. Would you have some sort of rollback feature?
Yeah, that is something that we've talked about a lot. And I think that we'll have to have some version of that, but that's part of the reason why we'll start with syncing net new things rather than updating things, just to get that push to prod rolled out. So that way we don't have to fully implement version control. But yeah, version control has been a really big conversation. And how does push to prod work in conjunction with the CLI and making sure that no one's stepping on each other's toes. I have a question for you all, if this is allowed. I'll flip the table. If you don't mind putting in the chat, I would love to hear about, if you're already using Sandboxes, sort of what you're using it to test, or if you aren't using Sandboxes, what you were hoping to test with Sandboxes. And then if everyone says workflows, I've got some more questions for you. No, it looks workflows. Okay. Yeah, nope, that makes sense. But this is awesome. Okay. So my big question for you guys with workflows is, what specifically are you looking to test with workflows in a Sandbox account versus workflows, that test workflow feature that we have built into your HubSpot production account? Because you can send a contact through a workflow and kind of see what happens. You'll see if it enrolled, you'll see where they drop off. What makes you want to test something in a Sandbox instead of using that functionality? Okay, Callie, you're saying allowing sales admins to test directly. And what, I guess, what about, why can't sales admins test directly in the production account? What's the concern there?
So yeah, we currently don't allow our sales admins to have workflow access at all because our sales teams are great. They just get a little excited about things. So the concern of them turning something on and breaking our current workflows is our concern. So right now, when they want to test something, they request it, I build it, and then we meet to test together. So this is going to alleviate a lot of those requests and also just save me time on my calendar.
Okay, cool. And so when thinking about sales admins testing workflows, would you want them all testing those workflows and experimenting in the same Sandbox account, or would you prefer to put those in different Sandbox accounts?
I think for now, I'll probably do one since I'm going to roll this slowly to them. I'll probably just have 1 or 2 with access, see how that goes. And then we're kind of going to just evaluate as we move forward.
Okay, awesome. And then I saw a comment, workflows that are daisy chained together. So I guess, what are you looking to test specifically with those workflows that are kind of daisy chained together? How would you test those things in a Sandbox account?
I don't have an exact way of that right now. I was just thinking that's one way I would use that where one workflow enrolls contacts into, one of a few different workflows. So just see how that all works.
Okay. I'm just scrolling through everyone's feedback, which I really appreciate you letting me turn this into a user research session, guys. Thank you. Happy to continue answering your questions as well.
Yeah, I think it's like David says, I think it's very useful to kind of hear what everybody wants to do with workflows and to kind of connect on that front. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear all these use cases. Yeah.
All right. I think my last question is for Alexi. So you mentioned to test larger lists with different criteria, testing one-off contacts won't cover all the different situations without running it completely. That makes a ton of sense. How will you test that larger list in the Sandbox account? Are you going to spot check those customers? How are you going to know that the workflow sort of did what you were expecting it to do?
So for example, I do a lot of like custom reporting, pulling from like lists and everything. And with these different like lists that are populated from the workflow, I would be able to see if the reports are being able, okay, sorry, this is confusing. If I can accurately build a report off of these lists, once I have, they fall into certain criteria, and then I'll build them in the custom report builder. And if it's not working out, where I'm not getting the right numbers, or it's not populating the way that I wanted it to, then I would honestly see a lot of it in the results of the reporting capabilities.
Okay. That does make sense. And when you say that you look at the reports to see if they were the right numbers, how do you know what the right number is if you're testing this for the first time?
Well, I mean, that does make sense of what the right number is. It depends on the situation. Like I have a good idea of where the number should be around based off of past history or other types of lists. Or just especially if we're going from another database into HubSpot, or people are tracking on spreadsheets and we're needing to change that. Now we're going to start tracking it in HubSpot. We want to report the same way that they would on the spreadsheet, but in HubSpot, we have to import that spreadsheet. So I have the accurate list of numbers there, but to run all these workflows and match up the different data fields and everything, I mean, running those types of workflows, I would be able to compare it to those types of numbers in the spreadsheets and such, or other database systems that they're switching over to HubSpot from.
Got it. Cool. That is super helpful. So thank you. Yeah, thank you guys for letting me ask you some questions too. I appreciate it.
It's a Q&A after all, so it doesn't matter which direction it's going.
Yeah, it's an AMA. It just goes both ways.
All right,
Anything
cool.
else?
That's one last question.
Yeah.
Let's say I get some errors in my initial sync to the Sandbox.
Yes.
Are there any things that I should be thinking about that might trigger an error, or should I just assume like something just didn't happen right on the on your side or our side?
Yes. This is a question that we go back and forth with all the time. Is to what level can users control errors, and to what level are they on our end? So I think that in general, the errors usually lie within HubSpot, and there is not a ton that users can do to fix them themselves, unfortunately. So the things that I'd recommend are give it a few minutes, run the sync again and see if that fixes it. And then file a support ticket with HubSpot, unfortunately. Our goal is to just reduce the number of errors that happen overall. The other piece of advice that I would give is make sure that you're only syncing the things that you need. Some asset types tend to be buggier in different portals. So if you really don't need themes, templates, and modules, just make sure that's checked off. If you really don't need pipelines, just make sure that's checked off. So just make sure that you're only syncing the things that you need, and that might help reduce some of the errors. But in general, they are unfortunately usually issues owned by us.
All right. Let's wait for maybe one last question from anyone in the audience. And if not, I'll try and wrap it up.
Sounds good.
This is your shot. Doesn't seem like any questions are coming through. Yeah, I'm just gonna wrap it up. I think we're at the 42-second mark, minute mark. That's pretty good. I am recording this AMA, so if you want to share this with any of your colleagues, it will be made available tomorrow in this community post. I'm just sharing the link right here. You can use the same link to, if you found this very helpful, leave an upvote there or share any feedback in the comments section. That always helps. I'm always trying to make our events better and just the overall community experience better. We have another AMA coming up next week on data sync, particularly the deal sync, which is launching in November 1st and is currently in open beta. If you want to attend that, I'm also quickly putting the link here. If I can be quick enough. Yeah, there we go. Just go to this link and you can sign up. But yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Dennis, and particularly thank you, Collette, for being here and answering all of these questions by the people in the community. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, any last words? Things you want to say before you leave?
Thank you for coming, asking questions, and thank you for using Sandboxes. My engineering team loves getting feedback, so do not feel bad about hitting those smiley faces on the CSAT survey. I share everything with them, so the team is seeing it. We are reading it. You are not just talking into the void, I promise. So thank you guys for all of your engagement with HubSpot. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and have a good rest of your day. See you next time. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.